And welcome, everyone. How lovely to see everyone today, this morning, this evening, this afternoon, whatever time frame it might be for you. I'm in Washington, so just like Stephanie, so it's morning for me. So lovely to see people from all around the world here. Thank you for being here. And I'm so excited to talk with you about self-care and coping. So, just a little quick bio on me is that I am a veterinary social worker. And I'm also a licensed clinical social worker and therapist. And I specialize in the human animal bond and mental health. So I work with a lot of folks in veterinary medicine, in animal rescue, in wildlife caretaking. I work with a lot of folks who love animals. And with that comes a lot of challenges, professionally speaking, as all of you can attest to, right? A lot of rewards as well, but a lot of challenges. So that's really what I specialize
Special.
in. And I'm very honored to do the work that I do. I've been doing this. I've been a therapist and social worker for 30 years, and I've been a veterinary social worker for 10. And so I really love to work with people all over the country, all over the world, see what kinds of support and resources I can provide. So, with that, we are going to talk about self-care and coping. And I will tell you that this is only an hour today, but we could talk about this for days and days on end. And each topic area I have in here is really its own presentation. So, I'm just sort of hitting the tip of the iceberg here today, but I do have resources and I do have, recommendations throughout. Also, Stephanie will be providing a PDF version of this PowerPoint today. So if we're moving through something a little more quickly and you didn't have a chance to write it down or something like that, please don't worry about that because we are going to make sure you get a copy of this where you can go back and you can reference it. Okay, so let's get started. So here are the core areas that we're going to cover today. Radical self-care, dimensions of wellness, self-compassion, setting healthy boundaries, and I will add maintaining them as well, because a lot of times that is the hardest part. Recognizing and completing the stress response cycle. So, like I said, each of these is their own topic, right? So, I've done presentations on all of these individually. So, we will be just sort of hitting the tip today. Certainly, any questions, any comments, anything like that, like Stephanie said, please do put in the chat throughout. We want to make sure that we're addressing as much as possible. Okay, so we're going to get started first with your professional quality of life. So I know with so much of the work you do, you're focused on the quality of life of those wonderful beings that you are caring for. And what I always ask people in these fields is, what about your quality of life? It's just as important. And so that's what we want to address first, is to talk about what is your professional quality of life. For those of you who are not familiar, this is a really wonderful professional quality of life assessment tool that you can use, and it's a living document. So, what I always recommend to folks is to do this first, kind of get a baseline, see where you're at, and then go back to it and continue to check in, kind of assess, right? It's really widely used, it's evidence-based, it's focused specifically on helping professions, which I really appreciate because it's very different being a helping professional, particularly in working with animals, than it is a lot of other professions who may experience compassion fatigue or burnout or so forth. Self-scoring, so it's private, right? It's just for you. I will say though, I've used this in organizations because I work with a lot of organizations and I found that this can be helpful with teams as well, just to kind of assess where things are at with your team. What I love about this is that it talks about not only compassion fatigue, but also compassion satisfaction, which we don't hear as much about, right? We hear a lot about burnout, compassion fatigue, but what about compassion satisfaction? What about your work inspires you and is rewarding and that you love, right? And that really drew you to the field to begin with. I think it's just as important to address that and assess that. Moral distress and moral injury. These are big ones that we see when you're caring for animals, as well as burnout. And what I want to make note of is that these are all different. Compassion fatigue is different than burnout, is different than moral distress and moral injury. It's possible to identify with one of these and not another, or to identify with all of them. Okay, so it's really important that we find the terminology and the definition that fits right for us and what we're going through. It also talks about secondary traumatic stress and vicarious trauma, which, of course, all of you likely have experienced. If not on an ongoing basis, you have experienced at some point in time in your career and your work. And then, as well as perceived support in your work culture and those dynamics, because those are just as important as all of these other areas that we're talking about. So we do have the link here. So I would really encourage you, if you have a chance or if you'd like to go ahead and go on to the link and to see what your baseline is. Okay, just to kind of get started. So let's now move into sort of what I call the 50-50 myth, right? Sort of that 50-50 balance of it's all got to look exactly the same. I have to be devoting 50% of my time to work in this way and 50% of my time to my personal life in this way. That puts a lot of pressure on everyone that you have. It has to sort of look perfect. It's this like perfect 50-50 balance. In reality, that is not how it works. In reality, sometimes it's 50-50, sometimes it's 70-30, sometimes it's 60-40, right? So you've got to find the balance that works for you. And also, when we talk about work-life balance, you've got to figure out what terminology fits for you. Maybe it's not balance. These are some terms that you can consider. Maybe it's strategies, choices, boundary management, right? Maybe it's blend. Maybe it's integration, how I integrate these different things in my life, right? These are just some thoughts and ideas. But figuring out what works best for you and also releasing yourself from the burden or the pressure of feeling like you're not succeeding in one area or another because it doesn't look 50-50. So let's just take that completely off the table and you get to own that and be flexible with how that works and looks for you. Okay, so dispelling that 50-50 myth. I always like to start things off talking about that so we can just take that off the table. So now let's move into our sustainable strategies. These are the four core areas that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about committing to radical self-care and what that is and what that looks like. And when Stephanie and I first met and talked about these ideas, we talked about how that does not necessarily equate to just taking bubble baths, right? It's a lot more than that. And as we know, there's a lot of sort of general feedback and advice out there for folks who work with animals about just do this or just do that or just do this. It's not that simple. We have to look at the nuances and we have to look at what fits for you. And I will tell you that a lot of the strategies that I use in working with folks is very evidence-based and research-based and very actionable. I believe that when you either come to a presentation like this or you come and see me for therapy or a group, if you're not walking away feeling like there's actionable steps, practical steps that you can take, then that's not really going to work for you. It needs to be something that you can put into practice, right? In addition to feeling witnessed and seen and heard and validated. So we're going to talk about radical self-care and what that is and what that isn't. We're going to talk about integrating self-compassion and really what that entails, setting and maintaining healthy boundaries. And that is a work in progress. In fact, all of these are a work in progress all the time, right? And then completing that stress response cycle, okay, and what that looks like and how important that really is when you are in this field and when you're doing the kind of really challenging work that you're doing. So let's first start with committing to radical self-care and what that really means. So, what is it? It's really knowing yourself and committing to take care of your needs first, above all else. So, if you're in the midst of a really busy time with your work and what you're doing in your care for animals or other areas that you're working in professionally, and you know you have to put a need of yours on the back burner, which so many people do in this profession, you know you're going to come back to that. Okay, so it's not that you put this on the back burner to care for another living being and then you never come back to it. You're being intentional, right? You're being intentional. You're saying, I have to focus on this right now, but my self-care is really important. I'm going to come back to this, and this is my plan for this. It's very intentional. Okay, it's a commitment to yourself, professionally and personally. It's also intentionally doing the necessary work that you need to heal your heart, body, and soul. So much of the work that I do, when I think about the therapy work that I do with folks who work with animals, is really getting down to a lot of past traumas and other core issues that people have been holding for a long time that really impacts their well-being personally and professionally. And that's really lovely that I can do that, that I can have that ability to do that and to meet people and to be with them in that way. When I worked in hospital settings and larger organization settings, as a veterinary social worker, I could only kind of hit the tip of the iceberg. So I wasn't able to do it in the same way I can do it now. So what I've really found is it's really important to do that work. It really is, especially as you're really struggling with compassion fatigue, burnout, your own traumas. You have to find someone that you trust that you can do some of this work with. Okay. So let's talk about, and this all falls into the realm of radical self-care. Let's talk about coping strategies versus self-care. So what I want to say, first and foremost, is we need both, and they're both very different. And a lot of times, what I find is that people who work with animals uh, kind of intermix the two, where they think they're doing self-care, but what they're really doing is a coping strategy. So then they are confused as to why long-term it's not working. And we're going to talk about that. So you need coping strategies and you need self-care. We need to have a mix and integration of both. They're both very important and they both serve different purposes. So you can probably guess which one is which on the screen. So again, start thinking about, and if you want to put in the chat, what coping strategies you have, what self-care strategies you have, and then we're going to break that down a little bit more. So coping strategies are what we do when we're in survival mode. They're short term. They're meant to be short term. They're actually not meant to be long term. They're meant to be in dealing with really stressful crisis moments or difficulties that we have to sort of be in action mode about. Okay. They're useful and they're necessary. They absolutely are. Because if you think about it, if you're in a crisis situation or a heightened situation where you need to really act, it's very challenging to think about doing something like self-care, right? You just really can't. But being intentional and thinking about when am I going to do that later? What's that going to look like? So coping strategies are good. They're good in this work. You need to have them. What I found though is that if that's all we have and that's what we feel like is our self-care or what we're confusing as our self-care, it becomes ultimately draining. It doesn't work and it's not health promoting, right? So I found that people will go into coping strategies during the course of their work and then on their time off, they're still doing coping, right? And they're feeling more exhausted and they're like, why can't I feel more rested? Why are these things not working? Why am I continuing these same cycles where it's just not working for me? A lot of times, if we dig deeper, we see it's because they're sort of stuck in that coping strategies place. Okay. So let's talk about self-care. Self-care it creates that sustainability for us. So it's self-initiated. We initiate it. We decide what it is. We commit to it. Only we know really what's going to work for us for self-care. It's always going to be something that promotes good health and general well-being. Think of it this way, it's our long-term plan or our bank to help us build reserves so that we can increase in time our stress management and our resiliency to the work. It's always health and wellness promoting. Okay. And so start to kind of think about maybe what areas you see yourself doing coping and how that's working, and what areas you see yourself doing self-care and how that's working. Okay. And remember, both are equally as important. So when we talk about self-care, it's really important for us to sort of dive into the 8 dimensions of wellness. And I give examples here as to what that looks like and what that could look like, and a very actionable plan as to how we can integrate this. I don't want people to feel overwhelmed. Whenever I say 8 dimensions of wellness, a lot of times people can be very much like, oh my gosh, I have to do all eight all at the same time. No. So let's just take that off the table. We want to be very realistic and very practical in how we look at this and how we integrate. So let's just sort of talk through these 8 dimensions. And what I find a lot of times is that people that do this work are usually doing one or two, right? We need to find a way to commit to all eight at different time frames. So this may not be daily, it may not be weekly, it may not even be monthly, but we're committing to each of these dimensions in different ways at different times. And what else I like to say is because so many of the times you have to multitask, you can actually multitask some of these. You can batch them together and you can create a system, a process for yourself where you're doing multiple of these, right? And you're not only doing them by yourself, maybe you're doing them with family or friends or coworkers or colleagues, right? So there's all different ways this can look that makes it feel realistic. Physical. The first one, engaging in regular exercise, play, and humor, good nutrition, and sleep hygiene. A lot of times when people think physical, they think just exercise. Exercise is good, absolutely. But there's other things too that are good and that release different neurotransmitters that we need, right? Play and humor. And I know there can be a lot of dark humor in this field, right? And that is a coping strategy. So thinking about other types of humor too is really important. Spiritual. This doesn't have to be religious, for folks who do not identify with a certain religion or faith. This can just be even like time in nature, being in nature, being amongst others or in environments where you have this greater sense of awe, right? So that can look all different ways for people. Meditation, breathing, mindfulness can be religion, faith, can be nature, can be so many things. It's just what brings you kind of a greater sense of awe around your surroundings and around life. Emotional, that can be talking to a mental health professional, it can be journaling, it can be being part of a peer-based group or an online forum where you feel like you're getting support and tapping into others, right? And sharing experiences, all of that. Intellectual, that's cultivating a lifelong learning outside of work. So beyond just CEs and those kinds of things that are, of course, very important, but other things like hobbies that you have that don't have to do with work, right? Enrolling in a class, doing volunteering, whatever it might be, right? Something that gets your brain stimulated and moving and thinking and in motion in a different way outside of work that helps give you that beginner lens, sort of that novice lens of your day to day. And the next one's financial. So having your finances in order, having backup plans, having advanced care planning for your family, depending on what stage of life you're in, right? Social, maintaining different types of social connections. So we need all different types of social connections to thrive in this world, right? We need casual acquaintances, we need neighbors, communities, online for some folks, we need close friendships, we need family members. So we need all different types of connections, and they all serve a different purpose and they're all beneficial in their own ways, right? So it's kind of taking stock of what that looks like for yourself. Occupational is everything you do for work. So CEs, skill building, setting professional boundaries, all of that, right? So everybody here today can say that they can check this one off for today because you're here, right? This is a CE, you're here. And finally, environmental. So how we engage with our environment. So that means our personal living space, our work living space, our neighborhood, whatever that might be, how we engage with that. And does it feel cluttered? That can be cluttered physically, mentally, psychologically. What are the dynamics there, right? Thinking about how your space that you're in and out of all day long, how that affects you, because it does. Research has shown that it does affect us. So those are the 8 dimensions of wellness. And when we talk about applying these, I like to apply the SMART model. And I'm sure folks are familiar, at least some folks are familiar with the SMART model of how you can apply each of these in your life, right? So SMART is basically it has to be specific, it has to be measurable, it has to be attainable and realistic, and then timely. right? So we have to make sure that whatever it is we're doing is practical in this way. Because if it isn't, if it doesn't fit these boxes, we're probably not going to do it or we're not going to do it for very long, right? That's just human nature. So these are some examples of how a self-care plan can look in each dimension. And what I would encourage you today is to look at one dimension maybe you could commit to start with. And what you might find is that that will have a ripple effect or you'll have overlap into other dimensions. So one dimension that really speaks to you that you'd like to maybe put a little more commitment or investment in for yourself, right? So this is what it could look like. Of course, this is just a template. It's going to look different for each person. Physical, maybe 30 minutes of daily exercise every day, or maybe 3 times a week, right? Whatever works best for you. It can be any type of physical exercise. Spiritual, maybe it's a 10-minute meditation or deep breathing, or just going outside and getting fresh air. Maybe it's that. Emotional, biweekly counseling from a mental health provider, or like I said, a peer-based support group or forum or debrief group, right? Some of you may already have that built into your workplace or your organization. Intellectual, enrolling in a program or class in the next 3 months. Notice how I say in caps, not work. So, not work, something that excites you, something that's different, right? That you're excited about trying. Financial, reassessing your financial status within the next month. And I know a lot of people tend to do this in January, right? So, this is a good time of year to kind of look at where's everything at with finances as I go into the new year. Social, planning a bi-weekly time with a close friend or family member. You know what? This can be FaceTime. This can be Zoom. It doesn't have to be in person. It can be in person, sure. It can be by phone, any sort of kind of social connection that you can make. Occupational, a CE by March. Again, you can check that one off because you got it done. You got it done in January. And then environmental, maybe picking a different area or section of your home to declutter or reorganize, on your day off, right? So again, very manageable, very realistic and attainable. Okay. All right. So now we're going to move into the second core area, and that's integrating self-compassion. And I love this quote from Dr. Kristen Neff, who actually coined the term self-compassion. She's done all the research. She's a psychologist, has done a lot of really wonderful research on self-compassion, both tender and fierce, which we're going to tap into and talk about both. And this quote is so true to what I see so much at the time from so many professionals who work with animals that I work with. You don't want to beat yourself up for beating yourself up in the vain hope that it will somehow make you stop beating yourself up. So I'm sure that most folks can attest to this, that people who work in this profession are really hard on themselves. You work really hard, you give all your care and your compassion and your energy and your skills and your knowledge to helping these animals in need, and then you are on the back burner, right? Or you don't think that you're doing a good enough job, or it can feel like it's not enough, or it's always sort of the same thing you're dealing with over and over again, can feel very daunting. And so I see so much of the time people really struggle with guilt and shame and perfectionism, which is a whole different talk in itself. I talk a lot about perfectionism in this field. So just remembering that you have to learn how to be compassionate and kind to yourself and find ways, in very simple ways, to do that, because you are doing this noble work. You are doing this amazing work and making such an impact that you have to fill your own tank up. You have to fill yourself up, right? And care for you in the way that you're caring for others. So let's talk about what self-compassion really is. There's three main components: self-kindness versus self-judgment, right? So treating yourself as you would a loved one who's going through a hard time. I mean, I would venture to say that most people here, if you have a loved one, somebody that you really care for who's really having a hard time, you're probably not going to give them a hard time on top of them already feeling badly about what they're going through. You're probably going to be supportive, right? And be a witness and validate and maybe give feedback, advice, what have you. Think about how you can do that for yourself because you deserve it as well. The second one is common humanity versus isolation. So remembering that we're all flawed. We all make mistakes. None of us are perfect. We all suffer and we all have struggles. And it looks different for each person, but we do. That's what happens for all of us, right? Everyone has a story. Every single person has a story, including you, right? So honoring that and remembering that you're not alone in that. That's why it's so important to be able to connect with others in a healthy way who get it, right? Number three is mindful awareness versus over identification. So being aware of your own suffering and being aware of others' suffering without getting swept away by negativity or taking on someone else's story. This is really difficult to do, especially in this work I've seen. There's so much over identification because you put your heart and soul into it. When you do something you're passionate about, when you care so much about, and you see there's such a high need for, of course, it's going to impact your heart and soul. Of course, it is. I understand. I do what I love too. I get that. And at the same time, we have to do what I call compassionate detachment. We need to have some of that, right? It's really important to be able to differentiate so that we are not so seeped in other tragedies and traumas and suffering that we are not caring for ourselves and remembering that we deserve that compassion and we have to do some letting go and some detachment as well. Okay. So let's talk about when we're talking about self-compassion, the two different types that Dr. Neff has really done a lot of research around, and both of these serve different purposes, right? We need these at different times. One may work for one situation or one thing we're going through, and the other may work for something else. So it's important to look at again how we can integrate these two together. So fierce self-compassion is really acting. It's very action focused to alleviate suffering, protecting, providing for, motivating ourselves. I'm sure that so many, if not all of you, are already doing this in your work, right? Really advocating and fighting for the animals that you're working with and for each other. Standing tall to say no and draw boundaries or fight injustice that you're seeing, saying yes to ourselves to do what's needed to be happy for our own needs, and doing something different if things are not working or something's not working for us, doing something different because we care enough about ourselves to do that. And we see how that's going to fill our tank to help ourselves and the ones we serve in the long run. Tender self-compassion is more gentle and nurturing, more self-soothing. So being with ourselves in an accepting and validating way, comforting ourselves, reassuring that we're not alone, just being soothing and gentle, not being so hard on ourselves. Being present with our own pain and suffering, really acknowledging and recognizing it without going to a place of sort of ruminating in it or sitting in it in a way that's not good for us. Asking ourselves, what do I need right now? What's going to be most helpful to me right now? And then also, what do I need to help alleviate my suffering right now? What's going to be most useful or helpful? Right. So we need both. And I love this diagram that Dr. Neff created around self-compassion. And I love that it incorporates the bears because it really shows us how we need this balance of being tender and accepting ourselves, right? And how we need that fierceness to alleviate our suffering and taking action. So you can think of yourself as like that fierce mama bear when you need to stand up for injustice. And you can think of yourself as that gentle, nurturing mama bear, right? When you need to care for you in a soothing way. So protecting, providing, motivating, balancing that with acceptance and tenderness and attending to our own healing, right? So together, they really do help us thrive if we can integrate different aspects of this in practical ways. And I have three different activities here that you're welcome to look at and see if you want to try any of these that sort of simulate these different types of self-compassion. And these are again from Dr. Neff and her work, both her book, Self-Compassion and Fierce Self-Compassion. Both of those books are excellent by her. She also has a website, which has free resources on there, meditations, and just different exercises you can try. So this can be very helpful is taking a self-compassion break. Just thinking of a stressful situation, or if you're in the midst of a stressful situation, being able to say, where do I feel this? What's my body telling me? Because a lot of times our body tells us, right? Before we want to really kind of admit it to ourselves, our body tells us in all different ways. Maybe our heart's racing, we have sweaty palms, maybe we have a headache, maybe we have a tightness in our shoulders or back, right? Dry mouth. So our body's going to tell us first. So we need to listen to what our body's saying. And then finding something that you can say to yourself that feels soothing or comforting, right, in that moment. And this is a time to remember that you are not alone, that all people struggle, that all people in this field struggle, right? You're not alone in that. So, this is, like I said, one example of tender self compassion as an activity that you can try. Another one is considering a friend or a loved one's viewpoint, which is also tapping into that tender self-compassion, which I talked about a little bit ago. So considering, the viewpoint from somebody that you really care about. For some people, they even utilize a younger version of themselves. Like if this was me as a child, what would I say to him or her right now? Right. So whichever works best for you. Right. Imagine what you would say to that someone who's faced with a similar situation, and then repeat those things back to yourself. And then the last one is to tap into fear, self-compassion. And this is one I use a lot with folks, is all around finding a feeling that you feel challenged in or you're struggling with or feels really heavy for you. And then doing this exercise of asking yourself these questions, right? And looking at what is this providing to you? What lesson, what teacher is this to you? And a lot of times we do find if we're having the same sort of emotion come up a lot, whether it's personally or professionally, that it's trying to tell us something. It's not good or bad. We don't want to judge it. It's trying to tell us something, right? So it's our job to pause and figure out what is it that it's trying to tell me. And maybe it's trying to help me. Maybe it's trying to help me in these different ways, whatever that might be, to give me a red flag about a situation that's not safe for me, to help me reset a boundary, to tell me that I need to look at how I can get unstuck from the situation, whatever it might be. So this is a really useful one for fierce self-compassion. Okay. Now we're going to move into setting healthy boundaries, which is a topic I really love and I could talk about probably all day long. But this is really imperative. It's just imperative, and it's the one that I see people who work with animals struggle with the most. Absolutely, which makes sense, right? It does. So, no judgment for you. You're going to now integrate some self-compassion as we move into setting healthy boundaries, and try not to have judgment. Try to really be kind to yourself and be honest with yourself at the same time. Something I always like to say when we talk about boundaries is that boundaries can be disguised as a lot of different things, especially if we find that we're having a pattern of some of these things over and over again. A lot of times it's because maybe we need to look at resetting some boundaries, right? Self-care issues, conflicts with other people, whether it's personal or professional, time management struggles, feeling overwhelmed or overstimulated, right? Whether that is with the work, whether that is with social media or the news or whatever, right? It might be. Feeling anxious or depressed, drained from that social media technology. I mean, let's face it, we have a lot coming at us, right? Every single day. Avoiding specific people or interactions, sending blurred or mixed messages to others, whether that's personal or professional. Resentment towards your workload colleagues, clientele, even animals that you're working with, whatever it might be, right? So taking a look at, do any of these fit for you? And if so, be kind to yourself and just recognize that you might be actually navigating a boundary issue. And this area of the presentation, I do want to say, is based a lot on the work from Nedra Tawwab, who is this wonderful social worker who's done a lot of work, and she's written books around setting boundaries, and has workbooks and has a podcast, and she's wonderful. So I highly recommend her for some of this work around boundaries. Okay. So let's talk about what are boundaries. I mean, basically, in short, what is okay and what's not okay. I mean, that's as simple as it gets, right? What's okay with you and what's not okay with you. And everybody's different because we're all individuals and we all have different needs and preferences and life stories, right? So it's going to look different for each person. Learning when to say no and then when to say yes. So boundaries aren't just about saying no. Boundaries are also about saying yes and what you say yes to, right? And realize what you say yes to also dictates what you're going to say no to, and vice versa, right? Guidelines and limits that you create to define safe and acceptable ways for others to treat you. You define this. So, a lot of times, if we find that we're really stuck with boundaries, in a compassionate way, a really good thing for us is to look at what is my part in this? Am I maybe not as clear? Maybe I think I'm clear, but maybe I need to get more clear, or maybe I need to say this differently, or maybe I need to make a tweak or edit with how I allow someone in or allow, some situation into my life. A lot of times that's what it looks like is just kind of assessing that and going, okay, what's my part in this and how do I need to care for myself? Goes back to that self-care piece. Expectations and needs that you have to feel safe and comfortable in all your relationships, both personally and professionally. And then expectations in all relationships that you have to stay mentally, physically, and emotionally safe, right? And well. And these are the types of boundaries that all of us as human beings need to have: physical, sexual, intellectual, emotional, energy, time, and material. We all need these. So maybe just sort of as you look at this list, if any kind of stand out to you as, oh, you know what? I've had some struggles or some challenges in that area. Maybe that's an area I need to work on. Just kind of be mindful about that. And there's three levels of boundaries, right? And I see this a lot of times in working with folks who care for animals, work with animals. Usually I will see porous over rigid, but I also do see rigid often. So porous is sort of weak or poorly expressed. So usually it just means you're sort of loosey-goosey with your boundaries, if that makes sense, right? You may just sort of, maybe you're a people pleaser or an animal pleaser. Maybe you want to kind of do it all, but then you are all the way at the bottom of the list, right? And you're not communicating your needs and you're just kind of suppressing them, pushing them down. So maybe you're not expressing what you need. Maybe there's a fear of there's going to be consequences to that. And so that feels scary or feels like something that you feel anxious about. Unintentionally harmful. Like really, none of these are usually people are doing these on purpose, right? They're coming from a place they need to protect themselves or they're acting in a way that they've learned early on. Because here's the thing that a lot of times we learn this in childhood, and we'll talk about that next, that's where sort of some of this starts from a role modeling standpoint, from a standpoint of how we protect ourselves or how we give of ourselves, right? So a lot of this starts way before we do this kind of work. Rigid is really building those walls to keep others out, to create safety and distance. So maybe this is true for folks who feel like if they open up a little bit, they're going to take on more than they can. It's going to be overwhelming and they're not going to be able to give to all. They're going to get themselves in a place where basically they're out of gas, right? They have an empty tank. So they're afraid of sort of opening up at all. And again, this is coming from a place of protection. And then healthy boundaries are an awareness of emotional, mental, physical bandwidth, and then having clear communication about that. And I want to say clear, simple, concise communication about it. So just sort of looking at where you might fall with these different categories. And of course, you know what? We may be in a situation where maybe we're more rigid with one area of our life, and then we're more healthy with another area of our life because boundaries are very relational. So just to kind of keep that in mind too. Here are some of the reasons why we may not have healthy boundaries. Family of origin or childhood issues, like I just mentioned a little bit ago. We may have unhealthy relationship attachment styles that are rooted in childhood. that permeate and continue and persevere into our adulthood. And this is a lot of the work that I do with folks who come to me for therapy, who work with animals, is this discovery process and doing some digger deeping and healing around this. Trauma, unhealthy role modeling, personal or professional, pre-existing mental health concerns, right, that impact what our boundaries look like and feel like. Maybe low self-worth of not really valuing ourselves, that we need to have those boundaries to take care of us. Unhealthy trauma bonding that we see so much in this field. We see trauma bonding in human health care areas. We see trauma bonding in animal care and veterinary medicine. So being mindful of that and what that looks like for folks, if that's something that you identify with as well. So those are some of the main reasons why we may not have healthy boundaries. And here are some of the feelings that come up with those unhealthy boundaries. Number one is resentfulness. So if we are finding we're in a situation we feel resentful, that's a red flag that we probably need to look at our boundary. Okay. And either did we overcommit or did we not communicate what we needed or what have you? Angry, frustration, feeling upset, feeling anxious, insecure, asking for a boundary, but then wanting to ask, but then feeling kind of insecure about it and feeling like you can't. Feeling taken advantage of or used. This is also another big one that I see. Depleted, exhausted, wanting to avoid or run away. I see that one a lot too. Having regret that we overgave or we didn't advocate for ourselves, right? We don't know what to do with that. We just feel badly about it. So these are definite red flags if you're having any of these come up, that it's time to take a look at your boundaries and how you can do some resetting. And here are 5 key steps for setting those boundaries. Number one is to be clear. Absolutely crystal clear. Keep it simple, specific, and direct. I always say don't communicate when you're feeling reactive. Okay, so if you're feeling triggered, you're feeling activated, you're feeling any of those feelings I just talked about, and you want to act on it immediately, hit the pause button. You can take your time. It's better to take a little bit of extra time and set a boundary than to do it in that moment where you're feeling reactive, because it's going to be received differently. And you're probably going to be more successful if you hit that pause button and come back to it. Number two is directly state your need or request or say no and identify your expectations. And what I always say with this is don't apologize for setting a boundary. Never apologize for your boundaries. You have a right to them, right? So keeping it so clear, stating your need, also saying what you want and what you like, not just what you don't want. Right. A lot of times when people are setting a boundary, they say, I don't want this. I don't want that. Don't do this. Right. That's important. Yet at the same time, we also need to say, here's what I would like instead, or here's what would work better for me instead. Right. Using I statements, dealing with the discomfort and the guilt and the fear and the awkwardness, right? You're going to feel all those things. And anybody who has set or reset a boundary has had these different feelings come up. It's just kind of part of the process, right? You have to sort of sit with it. It gets easier over time and it becomes more second nature. Using those I statements, I want, I need, I expect, I'm not comfortable with, right? Whatever it might be. Acclimation is the fourth step, and that is really sort of getting used to, kind of readjusting, getting used to what it feels like to set this boundary and to be with that. Try to start with low-hanging fruit, something that feels not as reactionary or something that doesn't feel quite as emotionally charged, right? That's a lot of times a better place to start, and then you can kind of build up that momentum and that success. And then number 5 is following up with action. And this is what I always say, the hardest part is consistency and maintenance, right? So you may find that you have some of these common responses when you go to set or reset a boundary. These are pretty normal. That there's going to be pushback or limit testing or ignoring, or people going to run right over them again, or you have to repeat, right? Or you have to find a different way to set it, right? Moving forward. This is pretty common to go through these things, right? Over time, being consistent, being congruent with what you say and what you do is going to be really important for you. Okay. So thinking about how you might deal with this ahead of time. I mean, hopefully people will be accepting, but the reality is that you're likely going to experience some of these things if you haven't already. So just kind of thinking about how am I going to handle that? What am I going to do? Right? How am I going to reset and be consistent? Okay. And then what I've included here for you to take a look at, as you'd like to, is a self-assessment. Just to kind of look at your boundaries. Again, we're going to be compassionate with ourselves and non-judgmental and not critical, but just kind of do a little brief assessment here. And this is from Neder Tawwab's Set Boundaries workbook, which is wonderful, with very actionable exercises where you can just kind of see what's my baseline. We talked about in the beginning, your baseline for your quality of life. What's my baseline for my boundaries? And kind of think about where am I starting from and what areas maybe do I need to look at a little more closely or deeply. Okay. And from Brene Brown, another wonderful social worker who's done a lot of fabulous research around vulnerability and shame. Clear is kind, unclear is unkind. So keeping that in mind, clear is kind for you and for others. Unclear is unkind for you and others. So try to get that clarity as much as you can. Keep it simple. All right, last section. And I love talking about the stress response cycle because, again, it really gives us a very concise framework to kind of think about your stress response cycles that you are experiencing in your work, in your personal life, and how to kind of move through what we call the chronic stress tunnels, which happens so often for people who work with animals. So just thinking about the stress response cycle, it's really rooted in the wonderful work by these two doctors who are sisters, Doctors Nagoski's, and it's called Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. And they have both a book and a workbook for it, and it's very actionable, and funny, I might add. It's got a lot of humor too, which is really important when we're doing this kind of work. So they've redefined burnout. Okay. And I love these core areas, these four core areas, because I think they really do fit for people who work with animals, who do this kind of work. So, combination of four key areas when we're talking about burnout: emotional exhaustion, that fatigue that comes with caring for too much and for too long, that depersonalization, right? That depletion of empathy, caring, or compassion. Maybe that's for yourself, maybe that's for people you work with, maybe that's for the animals. A decreased sense of accomplishment. So feeling that nothing you do makes any difference, right? Feeling overwhelmed, like, oh, it's the same thing over and over again, and I feel like it's not even a drop in the bucket, right? And lastly, that human giver syndrome. So giving your whole self and also simultaneously getting those messages that you're not allowed to need or demand anything and that self-care is selfish. And that could be from your industry, your organization, your team. It could be from you. It could be from others in your life, right? So just kind of keeping that in mind. So it's these four core areas. And when we talk about the stress response cycle, we want to look at three key things. We want to look at stressors, stress, and then how those two impact to create our stress response cycle. Okay, to combat burnout, we have to understand the differences here and the biological kind of cycle that we see, just like any other biological cycle, right? So thinking about, and if folks want to put this in the chat if you haven't already, some of the main stressors that you experience in your work. What are some of the main stressors that you're experiencing, or your team, or your organization, or what have you is experiencing, right? It's so nuanced. But just starting to list those out can be a really good part of this exercise. Just get it out and start releasing it and feeling validated by others in the process. And with those stressors, think about what causes your stress reaction, right? What are the external aspects of the stressors? What are the internal aspects? External is all the stimuli around us, right? long hours, no breaks, high caseloads or complex cases, right, that you're dealing with, challenging conversations, all those things. Internal could be those boundary struggles or rumination or perfectionism or whatever that might be, right? That's different for each person. So thinking about what is it that is causing my stress reaction, right? It's that external stuff and internal stuff. And then the stress is actually your physiological reaction that happens in your body as a response to a perceived threat. So the survival reaction that we have, and we all have this, the survival reaction that we have is mostly the same no matter what the threat is. Whether we're driving in traffic and stuck in traffic or being chased by a lion, our body doesn't necessarily know the difference, so it reacts to feeling like it's under attack or being threatened. Okay. And here are those three stages. The beginning is you perceive the threat. You're telling yourself a story or you feel a story about the stressor, the threat. The middle stage is you're reacting to the stressor. What's happening in your body? What's your body telling you? Because every system in your body is usually fully activated to try to escape this threat using all the energy, right? The end is when your body receives a signal that now that's over and you've escaped and now you're safe. So you'll see a real difference in your body and what your head is telling you. And this is the key time that we need to complete that stress response cycle. And we need to change our physiological state to a place of safety and do it as quickly as possible. Otherwise, if we don't, we get caught in these chronic stress tunnels that just go over and over and we can't seem to get out. And so it's one stressor built on top of the other, on top of the other, right? So thinking about your own sort of survival reactions, think about how you would react if you had lions chasing you. There's four main types of survival threat reactions. These are also known as trauma responses, right? But we all have one of these or a hybrid, right? So being able to identify which one is yours is really important. So fighting the lion, moving against, gaining power to eliminate the threat. Flight is the gazelle, moving away, withdrawing, hiding, running, right? Freezing is rabbit. So withdrawing, stalling, hitting the pause button, figuring out what's my next move. Do I stay frozen or do I get out of here? Right? Appease is the fawn. These are more the people pleasers. So moving towards, seeking to appease and please, not speaking up for your boundaries or needs and so forth. So kind of figuring out which one is yours. Okay. And the next few slides are just some strategies and some exercises for you to think about or look at doing if that's helpful to you. And again, this book and this workbook is amazing. So I'd highly recommend it if you want to do some more work around this. I will say, I think it's important to talk about the quick tips for you guys to take a look at this because these are things that you can do in the moment, right, to complete that stress response cycle. And all of these are evidence-based. So figuring out which of these might work at a different time when you're going through your own stress response cycle,
Oh, come on.
right? So movement, breathing, physical touch, rest, laughter, crying, connecting with somebody, doing something creative. Now these are going to work at different times, but these are generally things that you can do right away to try to complete that stress response cycle so that you can move out of it. Okay. These are some of these activities. So again, these are here for you when you get the PDF. And then finally, taking your stress seriously in this work is so important. None of this, I'm sure, is going to be new information. I'm sure everybody's really aware of the impact on what this work, but also not doing these things to care for yourself or take your stress seriously can do to you, both short term and long term. These are some of the main things that I've seen, and unfortunately, it can be really it can be really difficult and challenging, and it can also be for some people fatal It really can. So I think it's really important to just be mindful of if you're finding yourself struggling with any of these things, to seek out that support, whether it's mental health support, physical support, whatever it might be, so that you can care for yourself in this way with that kindness and compassion. And finally, the stress itself will kill you faster than the stressor will, unless you do something to complete the stress response cycle. While you're managing the day's stressors, your body is managing the day's stress. It's absolutely essential to your well-being that you give your body the resources it needs to complete the stress response cycles that have been activated. Okay. And we are at the end. And I just want to say thank you so much to everybody for being here today. And I'm just really honored that everybody was here and present and engaged. I'm really looking forward to the questions and comments, and I welcome you to reach out to me directly. I always welcome that. If you have questions, if you have concerns, if you're looking for resources or support, here's my contact information, and I do welcome that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I do want to just mention a couple housekeeping things, which is that we will be sending out a resource email after this, as well as instructions for how to access the recording. So do watch out for that. We'll include this information as well from Rachel, okay? So don't worry, we got your back.
We do.
Yeah. And the other thing is I'm just going to share this for a couple minutes.
Mhm.
Um, and Rachel, I don't know if you have a few minutes. I know we're at 11. If you're available to stick around, we have a few questions. Otherwise, I can send those to you afterwards. I don't know how you're feeling.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And I know
Okay.
we're right at 11, so thank you for that, Stephanie, and for the understanding. Yes, I'm happy
Definitely.
to stick around for a little bit if people have questions or
Okay.
comments. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, everybody, don't worry if you have to duck out, but if you want to stick around and ask questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand. I am going to share one screen while we chat, which is next month's coffee and tea topic. So if you want to join us next month, we are going to be talking about social media. So it's a big fun one next month as well. So I'm going to share that. But in the meantime, Rachel, one of the questions that were asked earlier in your talk is my therapist told me that I need to learn how to be sad without taking on the shame. Like when I lose an animal or I'm at capacity and have to say no. Do you have any tips for this?
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Whoever shared that, I really appreciate your vulnerability in sharing that and asking that question. I agree wholeheartedly with your therapist. And I would say one thing that I found that can be really helpful with that is to have a ritual or some sort of routine or something that you do when you lose an animal in that way that you can honor them. I have a lot of folks I work with who do something very simple, like whether it's they have a journal and they write down every time that they've lost a patient or lost an animal, and they keep that close to them, right? Other people will do something actionable where they feel like maybe they can go outside and honor that animal, depending on what type of animal it was, in whatever way speaks to them. But I've really found, and this is true for grief, really, I do a lot of grief work with folks, that you have to do something that honors that, right? It doesn't have to be huge, but something that is going to be honoring and feeling like there's a way that you're giving your loving kindness to yourself and to that animal at the same time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Rachel.
Yeah.
Um, we had one other question. I'm gonna find it. One moment, please. I got too many things open at the moment. We had a question about managing an overwhelming workload. And I'm just not finding the exact language of it, but it was if you're faced with more work than it's possible for you and your team to do, how do you approach setting boundaries around that?
I think I'd seen that before too. I think one thing to add to that is maybe, especially when you're not the person who sets an organizational boundaries.
Yeah, you're not in a position of power for it.
Hmm. And that so often I see that exactly that dynamic of that question. And thank you for sharing that additional piece. Absolutely. And you can end up feeling disempowered, right? And it can feel very daunting. I think it's really important to first identify with yourself what is doable from a volume standpoint and from a caseload standpoint, what you feel like is doable for you um, to be at your best, and what you feel like other factors or other things coming into play are not doable, right? Or too much. Because we all have different balls, right? In the air. And so a lot of times it's like we can hold a certain amount of balls, juggle a certain amount of balls, and then you throw one more in and it's just too much. So figuring out first what is your sort of good baseline place where you feel like you can do your best work and it feels manageable. And also what things can be delegated, right? What things really don't belong with certain people on a team. What things can be delegated. Sometimes, too, it's really helpful if you have others on the team in your group that are feeling that way to come together in a united way and be able to have conversation. Sometimes that makes, I found the biggest difference, but to do that in a constructive and productive way, right? And setting aside that time to really have that conversation with leadership about what those specific things are and how you're all feeling. That can be helpful. The hard thing is, so when we're working in systems like this, gosh, it can be so challenging because we have to look at it from a micro, meso, and macro standpoint and what things we really have control over and how we communicate our boundaries as to what we need. And if that's not going to be listened to or respected, then we have to make some hard choices for ourselves professionally and personally.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a really tough one, isn't it?
it's really tough. Yeah.
Yeah. We had another question. Could you say more about overcoming imposter syndrome?
Oh, imposter syndrome. Yes. Yes, imposter syndrome, I have worked with a lot, and I have found that the people who really identify with being perfectionists also identify with imposter syndrome. And what I always tell people with imposter syndrome is that the people who find themselves struggling with it are usually the people that are working their butts off. They're usually the people that are doing all the things they need to be doing, or they wouldn't care so much to have imposter syndrome, if that makes sense. It's kind of counterintuitive in that way. But I think really to get to the heart of imposter syndrome, you've got to do some perfectionism work.
Mm-hmm.
Really
Okay.
do. And you can do that. I mean, there's different books. I'm happy to offer some different books, podcasts, whatever that can help you do some of that work at home. But there's also therapists who really specialize in that. That can be really helpful. But you have to kind of dig to the core of the
Mhm.
perfectionism to kind of combat the imposter syndrome. I also want to say imposter syndrome is very common. So
Mm,
I want to validate that too and say
mhm.
that it's actually quite common. And so if you're feeling it, you're not alone. There's not something wrong with you. It means that you care a lot. It just means that maybe you have some more work to do around perfectionistic thinking.
Thank you for that. And I think it'd be great if you have some of those resources you want to throw in that email at the end there.
Yeah,
That'd
you
be
bet.
great. We have another question about some examples of how to complete, or could you share some examples of how to complete the stress response?
Sure, absolutely. Were there, when we talked about the stress response cycle, I had some of those quick tips.
Mhm.
I'm happy to go back to that slide.
Yeah, you're sharing now, so you should be able to do that.
There we go. Yeah, there it is. Okay, perfect. So some of these quick tips, this is where I would start to complete your stress response cycle. There's a lot of different strategies that the doctors lay out in their book and their workbook, the Burnout Redefined, the Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. However, I would start with these because I feel like for folks who work with animals in this field, these are easier to tap into and more actionable to start with.
Mhm.
So when we talk about quick tips, movement can be honestly, if you're in a stressful situation, you're moving through your cycle, you're in that completion place, that end place we've talked about. If you can even do stretching, if you can walk, If you can't leave your building, if you can walk and do some of that, that's helping to alleviate some of the stress that you're holding in your body. If you can do, and for some people, they don't like deep breathing. Some people love it. You can do deep breathing. You can do square breathing, which is, 4 seconds inhale, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds exhale. There's all different types of very quick breathing exercises that you can do. Um, Rest can even be, it doesn't necessarily mean sleep. It can even be if you can find a space where you can just sit. And for some people, this ends up being the bathroom or a closet, right? That's the reality, right? That you can just sit and even just close your eyes and just rest your eyes for a moment. Like if you can take even a moment or two and just do that, what you're doing is you're trying to like have that external stimuli go over here, be released, kind of roll off of you, and just kind of get centered again. Maybe you can combine that with a breath, right? Laughing with someone else, absolutely. Is there someone that you trust, a trusted person that you work with, or that you can text or call or what have you, that you can have laughter around, that you can cry to? Again, these do not need to be a half an hour, whatever. You can do this within 5 minutes, right? A lot of these things. Connection goes with what I just talked about. Doing something creative. Something I always did when I worked in hospitals, like in veterinary and animal medicine hospitals, was I always had like coloring. I always had things people could do with their hands, right? I actually did a lot of art therapy with folks where they could tap into very simple artistic kinds of activities that would get their mind sort of released and get that flowing through their body, right? Some of their creativity. And I will tell you, people who work with animals are some of the most creative people I've ever met. I mean, it makes sense. You have to be creative in the work that you do. But this can look in any number of ways, right? It can be singing, it can be dancing, it can be photography. Mine is photography. It can be drawing, it can be coloring, anything that kind of gets those creative juices flowing where you don't get stuck in your head. So hopefully those are some good examples to start with and seeing how those might work for you.
Yeah, thank you for going over that, Rachel. I think that's really helpful.
Sure, absolutely.
I
Yeah.
think we're pretty much at time if anyone has anything else really pressing. Otherwise, I think we're going to bring this meeting to a close. Thank you guys so much for also all of your advice and disclosures that you've put in the chat. I think it really helps us all to feel like we're in a community with people who understand. So thank you guys for being willing to share. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. And again, I'm in awe of the work that you do, and I'm here to support and help in any way I can. And thank you for everything that you're doing.